Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chad Koulis, Executive Director of the Midway Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us for our Midway Chamber Economic Development meeting. We're going to learn about how commercial properties are assessed. And as always, this recording is going to be available afterward, and we thank everybody who does watch it afterward. It's great that it has a life beyond just when we actually record it. So thank you for watching. And with that, I am going to turn things over to our Economic Development Chair from Sunrise Banks, Terry Baniszewski.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. When we were planning this, we didn't really look at the date of May 25th. And so I just want to make note of today's the anniversary of George Floyd's death. And that could be impacting the number of attendees we have today. But as Chad mentioned, we record this program so people can tune in later. So thank you very much for attending. And as Chad mentioned, I'm Terry Baniszewski with Sunrise Banks. I've been the Economic Development Chair of this committee for about a year and a half. And so we're always looking for those topics that we think members are interested in. Panel discussions, we talk a lot about everything impacting economic development, kind of in the Midway area, East Metro. So today, we thought, what better topic, excuse me here, than to talk about business valuations. And our guest today is Luis Rosario. Corey Erickson is also accompanying him, and we'll have some comments to make, and then Mark Hulsey. So I will start with Luis' introduction, and he will be the first to speak, and then Mark will follow after Corey makes some comments. So Luis Rosario is the director of the Ramsey County Assessor Office. Rosario has worked in the department since 2005. The Ramsey County Assessor's Office estimates market value and determines property classification for all properties in Ramsey County, currently consisting of more than 160,000 parcels valued at nearly $62.2 billion. Prior to joining Ramsey County, he owned and ran a private residential property appraisal firm in St. Paul for 6 years. He holds a BA in business finance from the University of St. Thomas. Luis grew up in St. Paul's West Side and currently resides in St. Paul's Summit Hill neighborhood with his wife, Annelle. The couple have an adult son and daughter. I'll also mention Mark Hulsey's bio now, and I'll let Luis introduce Corey in a moment. So Mark Hulsey, managing broker, founded Results Commercial in 2003, where he has led their commercial team to be one of the top performing commercial brokerage groups year after year in the Twin Cities metro area, and a national production leader within RE/MAX Commercial. In addition to being a member of the RE/MAX Hall of Fame and RE/MAX Lifetime Achievement Award, Mark has received numerous commercial real estate sales production awards every year since 2003. Mark is married to Nancy Hulsey, and they have 5 children. The Hulseys reside in St. Paul, Minnesota. So welcome all of our presenters, and Luis, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting us. Corey, I'm going to just let you go ahead and do your introduction of who you are, and then and if you could pull up the slide deck, that'd be great.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Corey Erickson. I'm the commercial supervisor in the assessor's office. I've been with the Ramsey County Assessor's Office for 22 years and supervising the commercial unit for the last 8 years. Graduate of Hamline University, lived in St. Paul for a number of years, have recently, well, 5 years ago, moved to just outside of St. Paul. So thanks for having us. And we prepared some PowerPoint slides, and hopefully everybody's seeing that on their screens.
Yeah, so if we could just go to the first slide, Corey, the next slide. So the county assessor's mission statement is really to provide an accurate, equitable valuation and classification of all real and taxable personal property located in Ramsey County. Next slide, please. We have approximately 167,000 parcels in Ramsey County. If I were going to break it down, it would be roughly 146,000 residential and about 13,000 commercial / apartments, and the rest are exempt. We do extensive work with classifications of property. We have homesteads, special programs such as contamination tax, open space, green acres, and our exempt properties are physically reviewed once every 6 years per statute. We also spend a significant amount of time defending our values with Minnesota tax court petition. Minnesota has its own tax court petitions. And the other thing that the office is responsible for is maintaining the Ramsey County tax map. So many of the splits or combinations or new plats that go through our office get the new parcel identification numbers from us, and we update our tax system. And we also have to meet Minnesota state reporting requirements. Next slide, please, Corey. So the appraiser's core activities. These are the statutory requirements that we do every year. I have a staff of 49 appraisers, 49 staff, and 21 are residential appraisers, and 12 are commercial appraisers. And each appraiser is assigned to an area of Ramsey County. They work with the city to get the new constructions and permits every year updated on our systems. We also have the appeals. There's really 3 different ways that you can appeal your value when you get your value notice in March. One is an informal appeal where you can call our office and talk to our appraiser and set up an appointment, and appraiser go out there and look at your property. The other way is to go to the Special Board of Appeal and Equalization, which is a group of Ramsey County residents that are appointed by the county commissioners, and they can hear your appeal as well. And once that board adjourns, the only way for you to appeal, you can appeal your property is through Minnesota Tax Court. And for the January 2nd, 2021 assessment, you would have until May 2nd, 2022 to do that, to file that appeal with Minnesota Tax Court. Appraisers in their areas review all the sales that come through that are recorded through the county, and we send them up to the state for Department of Revenue. The other statutory requirement we have is to review our properties once every 5 years, physically go out and take a look at them, or do a desktop review. That's called a quintile review. And of course, we review and look at all our sales. Corey, next slide. So who determines your property taxes? This slide is, if you could look at it like a 3-legged stool, our state legislators create the property tax policies, our laws, that the county assessor has to follow. So we determine the market value, and we assign a property class per the statutes that are required by statute. And then finally, the levy amount is determined by the taxing jurisdictions, such as your commissioners, your county commissioners, your city mayor, city councils, and school board. Next slide, Corey. So how do we determine the estimated market value for each property? So assessors estimate values are based on market sales and market data. Assessors use prior year sales and assessments. We're somewhat historians. We always look at last year's data to come up with the January 2nd value, and we put a time adjustment that we work with the Department of Revenue on. Assessors must we must always follow the market. And the changes in the market value are dictated by market activity. And our goal is really to have value parity between different types of properties and between properties of different values. And then assigning the classification of each parcel to determine the correct state class rate and ultimately the tax rate. Next slide, Corey. So our valuation procedures require the assessors staff to review all property once every 5 years per statute. So we review them once every 5 years, but we value every year. Our assessed values are based on sales occurring in a prescribed sales study. And what we do is mass appraisals, right? And I think that's really important that you understand. We have a computer assisted mass appraisal system that holds our data and helps us establish the estimated market value every year from our recent sales and our market data and our quintile review. And then our assessor staffs review the proposed assessment, and prior to the completion, we ensure it for accuracy and uniformity. And I also have 2 statisticians in our office that helps us with this information. And then, of course, each year, the Department of Revenue further reviews the county's valuations for accuracy and equity. And if they think we're off, the State Board of Assessors can issue an order to make some changes on any property type that they think they don't agree with. So that's never happened under my and I hope it never does. So and I also want to note that all our appraisers are licensed through the State Board of Assessors, and many have appraisal licenses through the Commerce Department as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Corey, and he's going to talk about the commercial values for the 2021 assessment.
Thank you, Luis. So probably the most unique thing about the 2021 assessment was that there were many property types that were known to be negatively impacted by the pandemic. Yet we didn't have market sale evidence to support that. But it was generally known that, so primarily these properties that I have listed on the slide, but others too, were negatively impacted by the pandemic. So what we did this year is we relied maybe more heavily than in previous years in setting these values. We relied on market reports and publications, what we were hearing from property owners through that quintile process, also what we were hearing from owners and their representatives through appeal work and permit review work in the fall, discussions our appraisers were having with brokers, developers, and fee appraisers. But maybe most uniquely this year, what we did differently than prior assessments was we relied on a group of Metro commercial appraisers met several times leading up to the 2021 assessment to discuss what we were seeing with values. Again, since we weren't seeing the sale activity, we were relying on what we were seeing in other ways, and then just discussions with each other. And we were also wanting to be on the same page in how we were adjusting values. Largely wanted to make sure we were being consistent in our thinking, but always being mindful that, certainly within the metro area, there are different markets. For example, the city of Roseville is much different than the city of Maple Grove and things like that. But we were finding a lot of similar trends though, too. So in terms of the properties listed on the slide, so just sharing with you the median percentage value decrease of each of these in the city of St. Paul for 2021. Restaurants, we went down 7% as a median value decrease. Hotels, it was minus 13%. Motels, minus 9%. The majority of shopping centers, retail varied, but the majority of shopping centers we held flat. Office, the median value reduction was 5%, and then fitness or gyms also in that 5% range. Then on the flip side are this list of properties primarily that, both going into the pandemic and then during the pandemic, really almost thrived. And many of these were also primarily the industrial properties, but medical office to a certain extent too, were doing quite well going into the pandemic. And then the difference between these properties and the properties on the prior slide were that we were seeing, definitely with the industrial properties, we were seeing sales evidence to help support what we were going to do in terms of increasing these values. So to share some of the median value increases for these, warehouses, we brought up on average, so a median value percentage increase of 11%, and then flex warehouses, so those with an office component, 9.1% median increase. Light manufacturing, also 9.1%. Mini warehouse or mini storage, 11% median increase. And then grocery stores did very well throughout the pandemic. They were doing well prior to the pandemic in terms of their value as commercial property, 4% median increase. And then medical office, 5.3% median increase. And then the next slide, this slide shows the aggregate total value of the Ramsey County assessment going back the last 18 years. So this is the total of residential, commercial, industrial, apartment, all property types. It does not include exempt property, leased public property, manufactured home, state assessed utility, and railroad property. But you'll notice that for 2021, we are at a record high. So despite the negative things that have gone on with values throughout the pandemic, we still reached a record high for 2021. And of course, a lot of that is because of what's been going on with the residential market. So our values our aggregate value includes predominantly residential value. And the residential market is doing quite well. And we saw increases countywide in 2021. But you'll notice that our prior peak, so the prior cycle peak was way back in 2007 at 49.8 billion roughly. And we passed that back in 2018. So the last 4 assessments now have been record assessment totals for Ramsey County. And this slide simply shows the change in aggregate value again in 2021 by property class and then kind of broad property areas. So it's City of St. Paul, suburban, and then countywide. And I would say we're focusing on the City of St. Paul and certainly focusing the discussion on commercial industrial. So you'll notice that the commercial assessment in the City of St. Paul actually shrunk somewhat, but it largely just held flat is what that's showing. And then industrial, as I was remarking, went up aggregate value growth of 10.7%, apartments 4.7%. And then while, it's showing here the 4% increase of residential citywide too. And then I would say the biggest difference you're seeing here between the City of St. Paul and suburban Ramsey County would be, so commercial is pretty similar. We did increase values significantly more in industrial in the City of St. Paul. Sales were showing that our industrial values were needing some growth in the city. And then in apartments, another year of growth countywide, but more of that growth was in the suburban areas than the city, but the city was still experiencing some growth in values. And then this slide just basically hits on the highlights of the 2021 commercial market. And these are the highlights of the property types that are probably most interesting in terms of their stories in the 2021 assessment. So a lot of where the commercial market is at is going to be, a lot of things are uncertain. So a lot is kind of dependent upon what happens as the economy fully opens in the coming months. Certainly going into 2021, the economy was not nearly as open as it is now. So some of this has changed. But in terms of office, there's the looming possibility of a long-term shift to remote work for some employees that could reduce the overall need for office space. Whether or not Ramsey County is on this path isn't entirely clear at this point. I'll say that going into 2021, because of a lack of market activity, both in new lease signings and property sales, The level of possible contraction wasn't entirely known, but since the pandemic started, local vacancy rates have increased very little, and new lease deals are similar, certainly 6 months ago, to pre-pandemic deals. And then retail, the biggest loser, well, the biggest segment of the retail industry, segment of the retail market that was negatively impacted by the pandemic was, I think you would say, it's restaurants, with malls being a close second. There aren't as many malls as restaurants, but so it's been a particularly challenging period for restaurants. It seems as though those that were able to switch to a quick serve operation did the best and were able to survive. Many restaurants closed. The city of St. Paul was not immune to that. And other restaurants, even if they didn't close, they were unable to pay rent, or were unable to pay full rent, and things like that, which didn't help those property owners. Grocery and big box stores have done very well throughout the pandemic. And there seems to be a great deal of optimism now as the economy is opening in terms of how that will impact restaurants and our regional malls. We have 2 of them in Ramsey County, none in the city of St. Paul, but Rosedale and Maplewood Mall in the county. And then hotel motel, much of that, how that real estate market goes forward is reliant upon how business travel returns. City of St. Paul has a certain amount of leisure travel, but not a ton. It's primarily business travel, certainly in downtown. But throughout the pandemic, the economy and the extended stay hotels did better than the conference and business hotels. But as I remarked earlier, we did give a overall decrease to hotels. And another thing that hurt Ramsey County going into the pandemic was that some new properties came online just prior to the pandemic starting. Spring Hill Suites in downtown St. Paul had recently opened. There's some suburban hotels opened. Avid Hotel in Roseville had recently opened. So right as the pandemic is starting and hotels are having record low occupancies, there was a lot of supply that was coming online. But I've heard reports of hotel doing better. So I would expect that it's always impossible to predict this early, but the values would be more stabilized possibly for 2022. But again, it's impossible to say at this point. And then there's the big winner industrial market. It has continued to do very well, largely due to the growth of e-commerce. And that was going on well before the pandemic started. Obviously, it's taken on a whole new life with the pandemic. In Ramsey, but let me remark that it's not just e-commerce. The other positive thing for the industrial market that's been going on throughout the pandemic is this need for, the strength of manufacturing. So there's been a huge demand for any product that a consumer can buy, whether it be furniture, automobiles. There's been a lot of supply issues, but household items, anything that's going to be used to supply a Lowe's or a Home Depot. So all that's been doing very well for the manufacturing industry, which is really helped those properties stay occupied and pay very strong rents. In Ramsey County, the dynamics in the industrial market have produced low vacancy rates, record high sale prices for industrial properties, increasing construction costs, and a lack of functional properties for sale continues to result in strong value appreciation in industrial. And this is true for old and new properties alike. So St. Paul, a lot of older industrial product, and it's doing just fine. And that's primarily because the demand for these properties exceeds the supply. So I think that's the last slide. Are there any questions for us?
There was one question that came in from Jeff Fensky. The percentage of appeals that are successful, residential versus industrial. And then he also commented, ever had anyone appeal that their property was assessed too low?
We've had that. We've had a few property owners that would like to see the values go up. And I think it's just them not understanding that, you know, ours is an assessed value. And if you need a loan, you'd have to go to a bank, and a bank would probably hire an appraiser to value their property. So once we kind of talked them through it, but we actually had one that went all the way to a special board of equalization asking for their value to go up.
So how about the percentage of appeals that are successful when people appeal them, residential versus industrial?
You know, on the informal appeals, I mean, it really depends. I mean, we get quite a few calls. This year we had about 800 calls, and well, we got more than 800. There's a lot that we just talk on the phone and let them go, and once they understand how we value properties, excuse me, they're okay with their value, that we follow the market. But you know, I'd say 10 to 15% are successful. I mean, there's some that come in with appraisals, or they just bought their property. On the residential side, it's been really tough because values just continue to are beating the market. I mean, the January 2nd assessment, and here we are in May, and the values are continually going up. So
Yeah, and I would say in terms of industrial, so just the mere fact that the industrial market is so strong and has been for the last few years, it's so that alone is going to make it a little bit more difficult to succeed in an appeal situation with an industrial property. You know, overall, we get a pretty large number of dismissals in terms of our appeals, so the formal appeals, and that varies in terms of what the market's doing. So so overall, I would say now it would just be, it'd be difficult to prevail on industrial appeal just because of the strength of the market.
Okay, thank you both very much. We'll have a few more questions at the end, but Mark, would you like to join in and provide some comments from your perspective, and feel free to give a little background to the crowd on our attendees on your perspective as a broker.
Sure, absolutely, Terry. Appreciate being here, Chad. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you guys today. So, yeah, my perspective is obviously very, very different than the county's, but I certainly concur with a lot of what's been said by the assessor's office, because we are the folks with the feet on the ground doing the deals, and so we get to see exactly what's going out in the marketplace every day. I'm a St. Paul resident. I live in the Summit Hill area. I have an office on Grand Avenue, own property on Grand Avenue. In fact, Grand Avenue, if there's a hot button when it comes to taxes, I'm sitting on it right now here on Grand Avenue, but that's kind of a separate subject I won't get into. But suffice it to say, does the tax bill have a big bearing on what's going on our avenue, like many of the other components of our local, rules and regulations here? And it has a huge impact. Certainly, but somebody who offices on Grand Avenue, owns property on Grand Avenue, and lives 2 blocks off of it, as we watch vacancies, much of which will get attributed to things like, yeah, but with taxes so high and rates so high, it's very difficult to make these numbers work. So that's our world. Our world is all about making the numbers work. So we're very much results commercial. We're a brokerage firm. And I've been in the business since the 80s. So I've been around for many, many decades doing this, and have owned dozens and dozens of properties myself. So I kind of come from many different perspectives. We're very much a seller broker. And so part of our regular job every day, of course, is running property valuations. We're income, investment, commercial property experts. That's all we do. We don't touch anything residential. We're only commercial. We work the 7-county metro area, so we certainly cover a big, broad territory, but we've sold hundreds of properties in St. Paul over the years, so we know it very well. And of course, with my own living here and experience with it, it's very, very hands-on. Not to mention the difference between when we're working a Randolph versus downtown versus Grand Avenue versus University Avenue. So then you start getting into nuance. And that's the difference between what we do versus certainly an assessor's office, because we get very nuanced. And what I mean by that is right now, as we're going out, as we have to help sellers, we help sellers dispose of their properties. And it's my job to get the most money for them. And of course, what's going on in the marketplace today on the commercial side does very much mirror the residential side. And the same thing that the assessor's office said here is that we have a lack of inventory, and we've had a lack of inventory. So as they're looking at sales going on, it's like, well, but where are the sales? And the demand has still been extraordinarily strong on the commercial side of things across the metro. We will say to buyers, or as we're doing teachings and trainings about the inventory out there, and it's very difficult to find properties for less than $1 million in our core urban areas that are available for purchase. And there's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand in the marketplace. And with what happened with the pandemic, of course, that creates a very vulturistic opportunity for many of the investors, saying, oh my goodness, look at what we might have coming here with either a correction or REO properties coming on the market, which we've done a tremendous amount of bank-owned work over the years. We still do. In fact, there's been such a great recession, we always have bank-owned business that we're working on. But the reality is that that has not come to fruition this round with this, crisis. And because lenders, thankfully, have worked very well with property owners to get them through this challenging time, which I'm delighted to see. I love seeing that. And I would love to see even more of it. And so rather than, putting down the heavy gauntlet with foreclosures, it's been more like, let's work this out. Let's figure out how we're going to get through this. And lenders have done a superb job with that. A lot of the guidance coming from, much higher levels as well, directing them to make sure that they work with those property owners. So that means that we too have been faced with a lower inventory situation on the commercial side. Everything we see when we rank our product categories, we work ourselves, our firm works in the top categories. So we're multifamily, office, retail, industrial, and land. And so we broker a lot of each of those categories here. And certainly no doubt that when we rank them, we put industrial, multifamily, I'll put land to the side, but industrial, multifamily, retail, office. And so on the office side of things, which of course that's where there's so much buzz about saying, my goodness, the sky is falling, there will be no more office, everybody's working at home. And what we're seeing is that certainly that's not the case. We watch trends both locally and we watch them nationally. And I think what we're going to see certainly is going to be a changing office environment, a changing working environment. But the idea that office is going away, we don't see that whatsoever. And we're seeing more and more of the big corporations saying we absolutely need collaboration. We watch this closely because it has a direct bearing upon value. So this is why we have to really make sure we're watching these trends. Now, the other side of that, we're working on a property on University Avenue right now where they closed the store because the employees would not go there any longer because it's not safe. Okay, so literally saying, you know what, we're done. We don't feel safe here anymore. So when we're dealing with a day like today with George Floyd's, the anniversary and dealing with what's going on there, the impact that has on our local market is very, very, very significant. So again, I'm not going to diminish the significance of it. It's very significant. The same way regulation has a very big bearing on our marketplace. And so I can tell you, as someone who's out there, taking care and feeding his family through the sale of helping sellers out there move their properties, when you hear more and more people saying, oh my goodness, I'm really concerned about regulation in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I'm concerned about safety in St. Paul, concerned about safety on University Avenue. What kind of impact does that have upon valuation? We just sent a broker opinion of value over to a building on University Avenue today, a few doors down from Menards. And in our discussion with the nonprofit owners of this building, the discussion was very much all about, we need to understand the sentiment of the marketplace as they start feeling concerned about safety up and down the avenue. And now what bearing will that have upon their property? And I say what bearing because, again, it's my job to not only get the most money for them, but get it done in a timely fashion. And so the timely fashion has to do with everything going on in the marketplace today. And so it becomes a bit complicated because, again, on one hand, you could say you've got, regulation and safety issues going on locally. On the other hand, we don't have very much inventory with a pent up demand with really low interest rates. So it becomes a very interesting, balancing act out there. The bottom line is that values are strong. Bottom line is, do we see any big correction coming? We don't. We don't see it. I would say that I concur with what the assessor's office said there overall. It's interesting because, I'll go back to 20 or 25 years or more and say, where the assessed value was versus the market value. And there seemed like there used to be a big discrepancy that maybe assessed here and market up here. Whereas now, while we as brokers, and we always have to educate the marketplace that market value is not determined by the assessor's office. And so we're always having to pound that in that, listen, that's the tax man doing their job. Okay. They're following their rules, their regulations, and they're doing their job. But is it a critical data point? Of course it's a critical data point. It's a huge data point because what's the first thing almost every buyer looks at? Assessed value. People make decisions on assessed value. And I got to say, as much as there's times where we want to pull our hair out because we feel like assessed value is really having as those numbers are going up and those taxes are going up and they can have a really tough situation. Again, I'm looking out on Grand Avenue right now, so I've got it kind of staring out in front of me as I see vacancies up and down the avenue, some of which, again, people would say is very much part of very high property taxes here. But I got to say that very many times I see numbers coming in from the assessor's office that are very, very close to market value. So credit where credit's due. I think our local assessing office does a very good job with whatever systems you guys all have in place. I think they do a very, very good job with really measuring the market and what's going on. So I think there's a pretty good amount of accuracy. We are brokers who do hundreds of broker opinion of values for lenders, investment groups, probate. So people come to us to do what's called a BOV, a broker opinion of value. It is not an appraisal, it's a broker opinion of value. And our methodology is a twofold methodology. So our methodology is we look at the comps. So we look at what are each of these products trading for on a per square foot basis. And we spend a tremendous amount of money on data. So data in our business, like most industries, is very expensive. So we spend a lot of money on data to make sure that we have it at our fingertips to know exactly where the value is at. And the second part of that is then an income valuation. So we do our comping, we do our income valuation. How much is something leasing for per square foot? Is it a net lease, gross lease, coming up with net operating income? What should be a commensurate cap rate? And then we start to put our values accordingly to all of that. And then we reconcile our values. So that's what we're experts at. Needless to say, when people come to us to sell their properties, that's step one, is that we put together a very detailed broker opinion of value. People also come to us as they're going to go through an appeal, and they'll say, broker, can you help me out here? Can you work on a broker opinion of value because I'm going to work on an appeal with the county? And we say, sure, we can, but you understand that the county is pulling data just like I'm pulling the data. So I don't know that my comps are going to get you what you're looking for, but sometimes maybe their comps are a little bit different than what's going on an income basis. Okay, because again, property taxes go up, but in order to get those properties leased, what must you do? Sometimes you need to reduce your base rent to compensate for your higher taxes. All of that has a bearing on net operating income, which has a bearing on the return on investment. And so that's why we have two methodologies that must be reconciled together into a single value. And then, like I said, nuance. And nuance can be everything from the difference between how are people feeling about a particular part of our metro, whether it be, again, from compliance issues, safety issues, to property specific about parking, about the roof that needs replacing, because we have to really dive in and dissect each one of these assets to make sure we're understanding all of these elements so that we can come up with a proper value. So that's a little bit about what we do over here and how we kind of all work together to make sure that we're, serving our clients, serving the marketplace the very best we can.
Thank you, Mark. Lots of good information there, and it kind of puts a question. I had a conversation over the weekend. We have this part of the Midway area called the Creative Enterprise Zone. And this weekend they were having a mural festival over by a couple of the breweries, which I would say are heavy industrial. So on one hand, you have these businesses that are industrial based that are locating there and are pretty well thriving there. And then on the other hand, you have the people that are now moving into apartments along the avenue, and their issues with transportation as far as trucks delivering and doing that. A few years ago, we had the garbage truck debate, over around Grand Avenue, McAllister, the whole city. But now what I was hearing on the weekend was, we love having all these new neighbors move in, but now the neighbors are saying, well, it's too noisy here because you have trucks delivering or hauling product or construction in the industrial area. And Chad and I probably agree on this. We want industry in the Midway because it provides jobs, it provides well-paying jobs. But it's been a hard mix to create. So certainly the north side of 94 is more industrial than the south side of 94. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just making commentary here on all of it impacts values, but you don't see the apartments being built along University Avenue being any less expensive to live there with all the industrial pieces surrounding them compared to living in an apartment over on Grand Avenue, where you don't necessarily have to deal with, let's call it industry. It feels like rents everywhere and the cost for projects everywhere run about the same. So, like I said, I'm going in a whirling dervish here. I don't really have a question out of that.
Well, Terry, maybe
just understanding, how the mix of development really impacts those valuations. Go ahead, Chad. You probably can get something out of what I'm spouting about.
Well, you kind of did it at the very end there. How does that factor into the values? So when you have land that's traditionally industrially zoned, and now all of a sudden you're getting new neighbors that are actual neighbors, they're people, it's a neighborhood all of a sudden, how does that factor into the value of all those different buildings, the industrial buildings and the residential, and what does that do for the tax base?
Well, obviously, from a broker perspective, it has a huge bearing, because that's why there's a cliche that says commercial follows residential. And so it's an old cliche. So, and if you can take this, whether it be, outlying suburbs and watching where housing is being built and then watching the commercial fill in accordingly. And then when we have urban infill or the redevelopment within the urban area. So University Avenue is a great example. I'm trying to think where I just was recently in another part of our city where, we're getting, obviously our urban areas are looking for greater density. So as I was over in West St. Paul and watching greater density start to filter into West St. Paul, and then what impact that has now on the commercial parcels, because we know by bringing in the people, we bring in commerce, and that means now we can, spur more restaurant growth, more retail growth. And so, and that's why the urban planners, it's critical that they're, be so good at what they do so that we can keep, our cities vibrant and commerce moving along in a good balance. And I think that's important. The same way, just as a side note, you guys, this is kind of interesting. So we get lots of requests from people saying, can you help us to either sell our automotive shop, our body shop? Gee whiz, I really need to find a place to put car sales or auto sales, or I need some outdoor storage. And so we're watching some of these sectors of the marketplace that there's this huge demand, and more urban areas are saying, we're not interested, we don't want it, we don't want outdoor storage, we don't want car use. And you start to find this again, if I have one more person call me up saying, Mark, I'm looking for something in Ramsey or Hennepin County to park my fleet of vehicles or outdoor storage, it's like, guys, listen, this is going away, it's evaporating. We have to shop places to find car sales for different clients, and it's like, they're going away. Rules are changing. And so the changing environment of some of these industries, it can be extraordinarily impactful. I mean, I think once again, University Avenue would be a great example of that. How many car dealerships did we used to have up and down the avenue? And of course, they're gone. And so now where do people go? And where is that small used car lot when more and more cities are saying, nope, we don't want it, whether it be environmental, or we just don't want the outside looking at these vehicles or trucks outside. So so it's all a tricky balance. I'm not an urban planner. I'm just simply a commercial investment broker. But that mix that you're talking about there, at least from an urban planning point of view, when I see that larger building going up, the first thing coming into my mind is, where's the C-store, right? Where's the grocery store? Do we actually have a good grocery store serving this area? Or where are they going to have to go to get their food, and what kind of restaurants are going to be popping up here? Restaurants that are actually might be affordable to the people living in this area, because again, that becomes a real discrepancy as well as we're watching, restaurant prices going up. As a real estate person, the thing that scares me and worries me, and even as somebody, I've got 5 children, all of whom are adult children, and I'm watching these prices and I've got them in their 20s. And the idea of having my 20-somethings year old even being able to find affordable housing themselves to purchase right now, as everything is skyrocketing, is a little bit scary. So I know I'm going off on some tangents here, but all of these things start to play together. And I know there aren't any simple solutions, but we need some smart people looking at these issues big time.
Luis, do you want to comment on anything?
Well,
around
I
that?
would say that, we follow the market. So if there was some exterior obsolescence that we're seeing values drop because of it, we definitely would follow the market. I mean, on the residential side, I know we have a gun range in Maplewood, and the property owners call us every year about, hey, we got this gun range, it's making all this noise, but the data just doesn't support it. People leave and the values continue to go up in that area. So it's not being affected by the gun range. And that would be the same with the noise on University Avenue. The market's going to dictate whether those values should go down or not.
So there was another question, and this might be for you, Luis. Do you figure taxes on affordable housing owned by a for-profit owner differently than if it's owned by a nonprofit?
That's a really good question. And the answer is no. We value those apartments or those housings the same, but they can go through the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency and file through the 4D application, and they would get a lower tax rate on that value. So then they would pay less taxes. Corey, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, you definitely did.
Okay.
There is one distinction in that there's a public housing, obviously, that exists in the city of St. Paul, and those properties are actually exempt from property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no distinction in terms of affordable housing, what the ownership is in terms of for-profit or nonprofits.
And I know there's been some legislative written up that they were trying to pass to even make that incentive even more, and I don't think it's been passed yet. So
Thank you for those comments. Chad, any other things come to mind? Questions you have or you've seen from any of our members regarding concern? I mean, like you said, the market demand really dictates a lot of it. And I guess one question for Mark, since I'm a banker, what would you call the biggest difference between a broker opinion of value versus an appraisal? That might be a long answer.
No, I mean, an appraisal is certainly held to a higher standard, okay, because they've got to follow the uniform appraisers protocol. And so we don't do that. And so our methodologies are very similar. Our data sources are similar. I can tell you that I get probably one call a week at least from appraisers. So appraisers are always calling our office because they need to talk to the brokers who are doing the work. And, and there's a little bit of art and a little bit of science when it comes to appraisal, as everybody certainly understands. It's not all just perfectly 100% cut and dry. And so, so that's really it. I mean, there's also the practical part of that. One of the big differences is that people will come to have a broker opinion of value done because, number one, we're much faster. Okay, so we can turn around a broker opinion of value in maybe a week. The cost is significantly less money to do a commercial broker opinion of value versus a commercial appraisal. So of course, lenders, when they're underwriting to a loan, they're not typically going to underwrite by a broker opinion of value. They're absolutely underwriting to an appraisal. But back in the day of huge REO, bank-owned properties, we had out-of-state lenders that we were producing 2, 3, 4, 5 broker opinion of values every week. And those asset managers were making their decisions, their disposition value decisions based on our broker opinion of value. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a lot of work. I mean, we don't just crank out a broker opinion of value in an hour. I mean, there's a lot of work involved, and typically we're going on site, we're looking at the property, we're trying to understand what necessary capital improvements are going to be required, what kind of challenges are we facing here, whether it be for parking, access, what's going on with the zoning, what's going on with the change of zoning through new comprehensive planning. And so there's a number of those pieces that we're looking at, again, as Lewis was saying about, obsolescence, and whether it be external or functional, and making sure that we're also understanding that from an broker opinion point of view. We deal a lot with people coming to us saying, Mark, I think my building should be torn down. I think this is perfect for redevelopment. What do you think? And many times we come along and say, no, your building actually still has life here. And I know you might want to think that your big payday is coming in with big developer with deep pockets is going to come dump you a big chunk of dough to go put their building up. But sorry, that's not going to work here. We deal with those issues quite often. So yeah, so those are the differences. But now we're not appraisers. We're only brokers. We only have an opinion. And those are some of the distinctions.
I have a question for both sides of the discussion. Has the moratorium on evictions shown up in your calculations at all?
I'll speak on my end of it, not so much yet, okay? So not too much. As we're looking at multifamily, we just moved a portfolio, a $7.5 million portfolio a couple of weeks ago. We've got a small, I'm not sure, 13 unit. I think I've got another 12 unit coming in right now. Our numbers are still very, very, very strong. Again, what we're seeing on the multifamily side, and actually that's my background for 30 years, but so much multifamily is traded off market that we actually trade a lot more of other products out there. But what we're seeing is that certainly Class A and Class B are not nearly as challenged with that issue. We can start getting into some of the Class C properties, and then there you might have more challenging tenancy where you start to get into some of these eviction moratoriums and what impact might that make. But again, because of the pandemic, whether I'm trading a net lease industrial property for $3 million, are those investors concerned about, are they paying rent? What supply chain issues is that industrial tenant having right now? Because what impact is that going to have upon the risk of this investment? So again, it can go everywhere from a net lease industrial property all the way down to a multifamily Class C asset that might be facing some tenancy issues. But again, because the market still remains so strong because of great rates, a tremendous amount of capital in the marketplace, People are happy to trade. So there's, as long as we still have our 1031, good and legal, and we can still 1031 tax exchange here, there's plenty of us that would love to go sell our investment properties and find a new income producing property right now. But just like on the house side, why do you want to go, unless you're doing a reverse 1031 exchange, you don't want to go out there and get yourself stuck, because demand is still so very strong.
Go ahead, Luis.
Yeah, I would say, I think it would go into play in the 22 pay 23 assessment if we saw an effect for it. But right now the markets are really strong, Jack, and we haven't really seen any changes. We're going to have to see what happens with that moratorium, and if they get federal aid to make themselves well. So.
So we're at 12:56, and I want to say thank you, guest panelists, presenters, for joining us today. A good amount of information that we really appreciated. And like I said, Chad recorded this, and he'll send it out to our whole membership. So you never know, you might have some people reaching out to you with some additional questions. So Chad, I will turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Terry. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here today, and to our presenters. We will send this out, and especially to our broker community. There's a lot of brokers in the chamber. I think they'll find this pretty interesting as well. I hope you can join us for our next event, which is going to be in person. Actually, our next two events are in person. On Thursday, we are doing our ribbon cutting for Bole Ethiopian Cuisine. They are back at a different location, 1341 Pascal Street. They had lost their building last year during civil unrest. At 4 o'clock, we'll be joining there, and at 4:30, we'll have a program which will include Mayor Carter. And then our next event after that is our golf tournament next Friday. So hope to see you at one or both of those events. And like I said, we will send out the recording. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.